Jesus Christ. Do you think we've given the Ukraine enough money, or is it not enough?
I think we overplayed our hand, and there was a chance that we could have gotten peace a few months ago, maybe a few months ago, 6-ish months ago, when Russia was on the back foot, and we could have struck a peace deal. And people were asking Zelensky, why don't you strike a peace deal and, just let them keep Crimea? And he said, basically like, why would we give Russia this peace right here? The thing is, ever since then, because we didn't strike this peace deal that it seems like could have been made from what I've read, but who knows? Since then, Russia has re-upped, they've redoubled their efforts, and now they've blown up a dam. And Russia has made it clear they will keep this going to 2024, 2025, 2026. Please. And at that point, the American appetite to continue to give money is they're not going to have the appetite for that anymore. And they're also embracing total war. They've already done a handful of massacres in Bucha, for example. They just went out and massacred civilians. They're also grabbing Ukrainian kids and taking them to Russia and shit. They are doing horrible things, okay? But most recently,
there's no disputing that, but there is a conversation that needs to be had, or at least said, that do other countries have a right to their own autonomy? And at what point do we get involved? And if the line in the stand for U.S. involvement is human atrocities, then why aren't we starting in Haiti, which is, a few hundred miles off our border, if that?
Yes.
That's my question.
Yes.
Why do we care so much about there?
And we pick and choose which ones we get involved in.
And that's my issue. It's not that if we're going to get involved for humanitarian issues, which this country, by the way, has no history of doing, then sure. But since this country has no history of doing that, I have no reason to believe that because of that precedent, they'd be doing that now. But let's discuss a few facts about the Ukraine. Something that we need to keep in mind, to your point, when you started this conversation, is that a lot of this is tied up with Putin's takeover of Crimea, right? So he annexed Crimea in March of 2014. And in response to that, the US and it's pretty much its NATO allies imposed a series of sanctions on Russia. And we have never acknowledged or recognized the fact that Russia has done that. And the significance of that is not only the extension of Russia's territorial landscape, if you will, but it's the only time that a European nation has used military force to take over another country since World War II. So that's just something that we need to keep in mind. But why is the Ukraine so important in the first place, outside of the fact that Russia just wants to expand its territories? And there's several reasons for that.
Mm-hmm. Talk about
First of all, the Ukraine has the feeding capabilities of 600 million people.
Breadbasket.
It is a natural resource for food that's grown.
Yeah. Time out real quick. I know people are thinking you're probably picturing a map right now. Russia's huge. Ukraine is to the south of Russia, so it actually has a much better climate for growing a ton of food. I know when people think Russia, they think snow, they think things aren't going to grow there. A lot of things grow in Ukraine, and they used Ukraine to feed the rest of the Soviet Union back in the day.
Yes, true. The Ukraine ranks first in uranium ores in Europe. They rank second in titanium reserves, 10th in the world. They have the second amount of iron ore reserves in the world. They are second in Europe in having mercury, third in Europe in gas, fourth in the world in natural resources, seventh in the world in coal reserves. And up to this point, as far as my research has shown, we've given the Ukraine $45 billion, and somewhere we are heading to upwards of $120 billion. That's extraordinary, considering that allegedly this country is in a recession.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. Just like us and Taiwan, and how Taiwan is home to TSMC, which is one of the best semiconductor manufacturers and several other semiconductor manufacturers for the entire world. And so it's of strategic importance Ukraine is of strategic importance. Why did Putin want Crimea? Well, because by owning Crimea, the entire Russian fleet now has access to the Black Sea and thereby the Mediterranean Sea, immediate access without necessarily needing to, strike a deal with, say, with a Gulf country or something, right?
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right. We pick and choose the problems and the crises and the conflicts that we get involved in, even though I still
Right. Like, why didn't we get
Russia
involved
the
when
aggressor.
the Crimean parliament seceded to break from the Ukraine and join Russia? I mean, they were under Russian duress when they did that. We didn't jump in then. And it's because the resources that we need are primarily on Ukrainian soil, not even on Crimean soil, which neighbors the region. And because of that, that only, emboldened Russia to gather troops on the Ukrainians' border. And the shameful part about it is that in 2014, on the heels of all of this happening, there was a quote unquote deal negotiated between the Ukraine and Russia. It was called the Minsk Agreement, and it was signed between Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany. They met in Belarus, and it was supposed to be like an let's stop killing each other agreement. And the deal between Russia and Ukraine was supposed to be, sort of like a ceasefire. But before the year even ended, the violence continued and the deal was compromised.
Right. In Donetsk and Luhansk, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now hold on. Let's also add a little bit of history here, because Russia and Ukraine have had beef, and Russia's, kind of constantly, going all the way back to the czars and shit. Russia has kind of constantly believed that they were entitled to, dominance of Ukraine. They've always wanted it to be either a vassal state or for it to be part of Russia. So there's anxiety amongst Ukrainians going all the way back then. Russia didn't want, Russia tried to get Ukrainians to stop speaking Ukrainian and just only have them speak Russian. So there are beefs that go way, way back. So there's an anxiety, there's a mistrust there. And then also, when the Soviet Union fell apart, there were Soviet fucking nuclear missiles in Ukraine at the time. Now, people were worried that the folks who actually know how to handle these missiles might be dead, might be leaving, don't know what's going on, and it'd be really fucked up if one of these nukes fell into hands that were unofficial or whatever. And so the world kind of told, hey, Ukraine, you've got these nukes, please give them up because you don't know what you're doing with them, and they're not secure enough, and everybody's a bit anxious. So the world pressured Ukraine to give up their nukes. And in exchange for Ukraine giving up their nukes that were left over from the Soviet Union, the US told them we would guarantee their borders. We told them that. So part of this is us trying to keep our end of the bargain without getting directly militarily involved, because nobody has the appetite for the US getting directly involved with yet another war somewhere else right now when we aren't directly provoked or attacked, right?
Right.
If this were back in the 70s, you might have been able, swap this out for Vietnam, you might have been able to convince people to start bombing or put boots on the ground. But the US has completely blown their credibility after Vietnam, after all the other wars between Vietnam and Iraq Part 1, Grenada and whatnot, and then Iraq won.
There failed invasions in Afghanistan. I mean, we forget that we abandoned the Kurds who were supportive of us. There's lots of things that we do. This country is not innocent. So let's not, act like we don't have some reason for people to be aggravated with us. The part of the problem is, though, we have to keep in mind that other countries have the right to be autonomous. Does that give them the right to commit human rights crimes? No. But then why are we picking and choosing which countries we care about and which countries we don't? And at what price? It's a human rights crime, as far as I'm concerned, for people in this country to not have water. Isn't that a basic need?
It is. And yeah, so let's talk about this theory of yours, which I do believe. Let's say we are able to push the Russians completely out of Ukraine somehow. Probably not going to happen unless the US starts using our own jets and fighter pilots and bombs and drones and whatnot to take on the Russians directly, which we're trying to avoid doing. But it's like, if that's inevitably where we're going, then y'all need to just do it. let's say that happens. What happens then? Of course, we put bases all up and down Ukraine. We call them NATO bases, but they're mostly staffed by US personnel. Right now, Poland's part of NATO. We have bases in Poland.
Yes, we do.
Sweden's going to join. Finland's going to join NATO. They're gonna have some
unprecedented, by the way.
Putin, this is what you get for his aggression with Ukraine. Of course, Finland is going to rush to join NATO now because Finland borders Russia on the complete opposite side of Europe. And yeah, so he put all of his chess pieces on Ukraine. So Finland's going to come in and say, hey, like, we want to join NATO and we want to join it right now. So that application is being rushed, and it is a foregone conclusion at this point. And what's Putin going to do? Invade Finland and tell them that they can't join NATO either? Because you're talking about its autonomy. Finland should be allowed to join NATO if they want.
This is compromising Europe in a way that we haven't seen since World War II. But something else to keep in mind is that the Ukraine is a predominantly ethnically white Russian country. I mean, 1 out of 6 people are ethnic Russians. 1 out of 3 speak both Russian and Ukrainian.
Yeah, they're not just Caucasian; they're Slavic.
You're right, and there is a dominant portion of the country that is sympathetic to Nazi ideology, because you have to remember the Nazis are the ones who freed them from the strong arm of the Soviet power at the time.
See, that's the part that I'm interested in figuring out how much of that is real and how much of that is Russia propaganda, because they're, just like we said, we were going in for Operation Iraqi Freedom to free, to bring some freedom to Iraq. Just like the Italians, when they invaded Ethiopia, they said they were going in to stop slavery. Okay. Weapons of mass destruction, slavery. Oh, Gulf of Tonkin, we're going in there to stop communism in Vietnam. The Russians claim they're going into Ukraine to denazify Ukraine. And I believe
that part is untrue. What is true is that there is a dominant Nazi ideology that bleeds through Ukrainian culture. I mean, they lean white. There's no disputing this.
Just because they're white doesn't mean they're Nazis.
No, not necessarily. But what does make me think that they are, at the very least, sensitive to the ideology, or if you will, it's not a deal breaker, is how they treated the Africans who were in their country setting at the time who were trying to get out.
Oh.
They wouldn't let them on the trains. Don't get it twisted. They were like Ukrainians first.
Interesting. And at what point, what's the difference? Do we draw a difference at all between white supremacy and Nazi ideology? For the sake of,
is there a huge difference? I mean, what's the difference?
I think there's a difference between between an ethnocentric racist and a full tilt Nazi who believes, like, literally it's okay to kill anyone who's, for the sake of purity of the white race, we want to kill anyone it's okay to kill anyone who's not white, including Jewish people.
Yeah, let's see.
There's one thing if you're just like a racist bigot. There's another thing if you're a racist bigot who is like white power. It's another thing if you believe kill everybody who isn't white. Like, that's you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, like, levels, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There's levels of everything, but there have been enough reports that have been substantiated, one of which was reported in NBC News in March 2022, where at the Polish border, Africans were not allowed to board the trains out of the region. They were picking Ukrainians. They were saying Ukrainians only, according to reports. And they were not checking the passports of Ukrainians nearly in the same extensive focus as they were to the African citizens who were living in the Ukraine at the time, and have consistently reported racist discrimination and abuse at the borders.
Interesting. Now, is that
also according to Reuters in 2022, the African Union announced that it was receiving hundreds and hundreds of reports that African citizens in the Ukraine were being refused the right to cross the borders to safety.
Now, were they being blocked? Were they being blocked by, say, like, by the country they were trying to go into, or were they being blocked by Ukrainians?
They were being blocked by Ukrainians in getting out of the country.
Got you. Okay.
They were getting Ukrainians out first. So when they had trains full of people getting out, they were not letting Africans and gypsies, if you will, go on unless until after all the Ukrainians got on. I mean, look, everybody's trying to get out of here, right?
So that's definitely ethnocentrism, potentially even xenophobia. Does it
Right.
rise?
And I'm
to the
not saying
level
that they're all Nazis. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
Nazism is most likely not a deal breaker in their relationships with one another.
Interesting.
I mean, they might not like it, but they're not going to be like, oh my God, I'm standing my ground against this. I mean, it's the Ukraine. The majority of the country is white.
Interesting. How do you think this ends?
It doesn't.